In 2012, a chap called Gwyn Williams, G4FKH, proposed to the RSGB and to British amateurs at large to become involved in a noise floor monitoring campaign where we would record the noise floor on an unused portion of band, possibly even just outside of the amateur bands, on a regular basis on each of the HF amateur bands, so that although it was principally an unscientific endeavour, it would at least allow us to chart the progress of the noise floor and identify trends. Well, since he made that request, things have moved forward quite positively, and in alliance with Cross Country Wireless, CCW, they have now produced a software-defined radio we call the Sentinel, and its primary purpose is to do exactly what Gwyn attempted to accomplish back in 2012, which is to take regular measurements of the noise floor on a number of bands at regular intervals to provide scientifically verifiable information regarding the state of the noise floor. This can be done, of course, because software-defined radios have a calibrated signal level meter. And with each of the Sentinel radios that is sent out, there is some calibration data which you would install in the software which is supplied, which allows the data which is sent over the network to be accurate and traceable to a national standard. Now, this is particularly useful and particularly important because it gives us a legitimate and scientifically verifiable data set with which to view the conditions all around the country, monitoring the noise floor, but also to monitor the changes in the noise floor over time. And I believe that now is an important time, possibly more important than ever, to get as many people as we can involved in this endeavour, so that we have data which we can use when we are dealing with the spectrum management authorities. By having the data, it gives us a sound foundation for having discussions. Without that data, all we have to rely on are the ITUR P372 noise figures for rural, urban and industrial sites, which is arguably not that accurate because, of course, it's rather generic in nature. At the time I'm recording this video, I think there are 6 or 7 participants in the noise floor monitoring scheme, myself included, and I wish to put forward and promote this scheme to try and get some more participants involved. Yes, it does cost money, but I believe that it is more than just a worthwhile exercise because it will give us a snapshot starting in 2013 of the current noise floor conditions across the UK. As those conditions continue to worsen with the influx of more power line networking devices, and let's face it, at the time I've recorded this video, it was about a week or so ago, a week to 10 days ago, that Ofcom announced that they were no longer prepared to investigate spectrum abuse on 60 meters, 5 megahertz, because it's not an ITU allocation. And of course, 5 megahertz is the one band which is not notched in power line networking. And I can vouch for that because I had now lost 60 meters here due to neighbours having power line networking and Ofcom refusing to deal with it. We need data, we need participants, and I'm appealing to you that if you are experimentalist in nature and you have a few quid in your pocket, that you're willing to contribute to an ongoing endeavour which will help provide a snapshot, but also an ongoing vision of the conditions RHF, then I appeal to you to join. Please make an effort, make a contribution so that we have data to work with and data to negotiate with. This is the end of this first part of this video. The next part of this video is going to be dedicated to showing you the pitfalls that I encountered in setting up the Sentinel noise monitoring system, and ultimately how I overcame those pitfalls. Please bear with me, and together we'll see if we can't make a difference. This is the, hey, here we go. This is the Sentinel HF SDR receiver. Ooh, I've still got my calibration resistor on the back end. As you can see, it is USB based. However, for whatever reason, they decided to use RS232, as, can't get you in focus, use RS232 as the basis for the command and control. And this, well, this really proved quite problematic, to say the least. And so I'm going to take you through now the setting up of this receiver and the difficulties and pitfalls that I encountered while trying to do so. Now, like a lot of amateurs, I suspect in the UK, we tend to be herded into small corners or back rooms or sheds or whatever in order to be able to conduct our hobbies. And room, of course, can often be a problem. Now, what I hadn't anticipated, and that was largely because I didn't read the fine print when I ordered the Sentinel, is that it only works with Windows XP. Now, when I discovered this, the bottom fell out of my world because I haven't had an XP machine here in use for about 7 years, apart from 1 or 2 experimental periods. So that was, of course, my first pitfall. I, of course, naturally tried to make it work on Windows 7 and Windows 8. And although I've been successful over the years in making things work when they shouldn't be able to, I wasn't able to succeed in this instance. So this left me with a need to run an XP machine. Now, going back to the point I was just making, is we tend to be in fairly confined areas, we amateurs, and the amount of space available to run, you know, in this instance, another computer, another XP machine, brings with it some serious problems. Now, I'm luckier possibly than some, and I have a fairly complex SDR setup here. Right. As you can see, I'll just quickly demonstrate the amount of space that I have or have not got at this location. I'll just do a quick pan around. As you can see, multiple monitors due to being an SDR station. The second SDR laptop off, of course, which is the one that I use with 4 meters. I pop you up here, as you can see. There we go. And on round, I apologise for the mess. So, as you can see, I am somewhat constrained by space, and the idea of having another PC here fills me full of dread. And it's bad enough trying to keep the noise levels down, radiated noise levels down from the equipment without adding yet another PC. And of course, yes, more maintenance, more things to worry about going wrong. So, faced with the problem of having another instance of a computer running here in the shack, the first idea that I came up with was to run not another computer, but a virtual machine with the operating system on it. And I didn't have any XPs present on the property at all. So that would have been a little bit problematic. Of course, I could have downloaded something, but obviously you have to buy a license for it, etc. So I thought, well, why don't we try ReactOS, which is a 32-bit Windows compatible, binary compatible operating system, which in theory will allow you to run most applications which will run on a Windows environment should run on ReactOS. But the operating system, despite having been around for some years, is still in alpha stage. So it's not the most reliable of components. And of course, if you want a noise monitoring system to operate over time, then you want it to be reliable. But nonetheless, there was no license, no fees involved in running ReactOS. So naturally, I tried to make ReactOS accept Sentinel's software to begin with. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. So I thought, well, in that case, I'm left with only one other alternative, and that was to run a virtual machine with XP. And so I took the necessary steps to obtain XP in order to try it. My first attempt at running XP was unsuccessful. I'm not entirely sure what was causing it, but I was getting noise from the laptop's own microphone contaminating the audio from the SDR's codec. And so because of this, I had a little think, and I remembered that I still had my sister's netbook locked away in a cupboard here, which was running XP. Now, although it's software-defined radio, and normally SDR requires a little bit of grunt with a PC, the Sentinel software is quite simplistic. It doesn't have a spectrum display consuming up CPU cycles. It just simply processes the 48 kilohertz swathe of spectrum and then outputs that to a filter bandwidth to resolve down to audio. So purely for taking measurements, it was ideal and doesn't require a computer with a great deal of speed behind it. And to my surprise, it worked. It was borderline, but it was working. It was able to resolve the audio without any significant crackling or popping, etc. And so I set it to work, and it ran for several days, in fact. And then the netbook went up in smoke. Well, not quite literally, but you know the idea. It's beyond redemption, which of course then left me scratching my head yet again. And so in the interim, I reverted back to the Dell laptop that I tried running a virtual XP on before, and in desperation I tried it again. Only this time there was no contamination coming from the microphone, which I had disabled totally when I tried it the first time, but despite my best efforts, for whatever reason, it was still there. Second time round, it wasn't. And so, hey presto, I was able to continue running the noise monitoring software on the laptop in a virtualized XP. And of course, this is option number one for many amateurs who don't have the room or the budget to run yet another computer dedicated to the operating system necessary to run it. But of course, most laptops don't have RS232. As it turns out, mine does, but it won't work with a virtualized machine. It doesn't like it. Don't understand why. But what we can buy is one of these. You know what these are. Yes, it's an RS232 to USB converter for only a few pounds with a genuine prolific chip. You can buy, you can see it there as well.
you can get yourself a COM port for the Sentinel for between £5 or £10. So that was that problem solved, and it was running. But with the virtualized machine running XP, running the software-defined Sentinel, there wasn't enough CPU grunt left for me to do the software-defined radio tasks that the laptop normally runs. And so I had to look for yet another alternative. We'll come to that in a minute. Next, we're going to actually look at the virtualized machine. Okay, moving swiftly onwards, talking about the virtual machine. I used the Oracle VirtualBox virtual machine for the Sentinel. Now, it's important to set the stage right at the beginning for the amount of processor usage that the virtual machine takes. I have enabled the process monitor. As you can see, the process monitor is already running quite high at 30 to 40%, and that's because of the resource intensive screen recording application that's already in use. With this laptop, which is an i5 processor, 560 I think, and 3 GB of RAM, the virtual machine running Sentinel runs at about 16 to 20% CPU when the screen app isn't running. So these are the virtual machines I had set up. Here is the Reactos machine that I attempted to get running with Sentinel unsuccessfully. So we'll go straight in and look at the XP virtual machine and its settings. So we'll zip through these settings very quickly. Version, Windows XP, etc., etc. The advanced settings are really not very relevant. The base memory I've set at 380 megabytes. Now I've got 3 GB of memory on this i5 laptop. This is running Windows 8, by the way. The host is running Windows 8. 380 megabytes has been demonstrated to be more than sufficient for running the XP virtual machine with the Sentinel. I've not experienced any difficulties with memories at that level. So I have one hard disk, which of course is the virtual machine. The other settings are original settings, stock settings. 2 CPUs, because the host machine has 2 CPUs. That was a personal choice, but it certainly hasn't cost me anything. I've enabled acceleration by default. The video display, originally set at 18 megabytes, I've upped it to 32 megabytes. I didn't experience any difficulties at 18. I took to increasing the original screen resolution, which was 800 by 600. I increased it to 1024 by 768, and I chose to increase the memory video assigned to that, enable 2 3D and 2D acceleration. Storage, well, of course, the virtual hard disk storage hard disk set as an IDE device. Audio, I did try using the Intel HD audio setting, which is the integrated audio that is built onto the laptop, but I was unsuccessful in getting any sound to come out of it. So I defaulted back to the ICH AC97, and that seems to work just fine. Network, all stock settings set up when VirtualBox was installed. Serial ports are no longer an issue because I'm using a USB to RS232 converter. When I tried to use the Dell's internal serial port using this facility, it didn't get on very well with the Sentinel. The Sentinel's relays would click and crash worse than an MFJ antenna tuner. So I resorted to using the RS232 to USB converter, and that seems to work just fine. Now, the crux is, in order to get the Sentinel working, of course, the virtual machine has to have the drivers installed for the USB audio codec that is used for the USB audio hardware in the Sentinel device itself. And so we're able to download the PCM 2900 drivers direct from the TI website. And inside the VirtualBox settings, this identifies as the Burr Brown from TI USB audio codec. So that's enabled by default. And also the Prolific Technology USB serial controller. Had some initial troubles finding which COM port it was assigned to, because XP didn't want to reveal that information, but it only took a few minutes of trial and error to find which COM port it was on. And once I'd done that, it was fine. Everything was working just tickety-boo. So we'll run up XP. You have to twiddle your thumb there for a moment while it does its thing. Now, of course, as you can see, the processor usage has gone up some, but that's unavoidable given the fact that I'm using, as I say, a fairly resource-hungry screen recorder. But I get on particularly well with this one. I've used it in practically all of my other videos. So, I copied the CCW Sentinel folder across to the Windows desktop. I did have to manually bring across mscomctl.ocx. There was also, and mswinsock.ocx kept reporting that that one was missing. So that was brought across also. And after that was done, then the Sentinel seemed to work just fine. Well, as you can see, the Sentinel seems to be operational. No difficulties. If I stop it for one moment, by pressing the stop button, this removes the spectrum display for the data digital modes decoder that's got built into it. But it also reveals certain fields which need to be plugged in. Now, when you set up the CCW Sentinel for the first time, there are some important settings which need to go in. When you buy the Sentinel, you're provided a sheet of paper which contains the calibration data, which goes back to a traceable UK standard. And these are very important to make sure they're entered in, because the signal levels that the Sentinel reports via APRS take into account these calibration adjustments, so these do need to be entered in. So each of these adjustments that you see here in each of these fields, the numbers which were provided in the CCW paperwork that was supplied with Sentinel. Obviously, I had to find the COM port myself because of this particular arrangement. Wasn't a problem. The clock frequency was supplied, so I've also entered in that clock frequency. It's not been explicitly stated whether this needs to be done. However, there's a box for it, and the number was provided in the paperwork, so I've used it. And the same with the I over Q gain and the I over Q phase. These numbers were also provided in the calibration data, so I've gone ahead and entered these. Again, they're not explicitly stated that they're required, nor are they stated that they are not required. So I've erred on the side of caution and input all of the data that was provided. You need also to contact CCW in order to get a passcode for your APRS call sign, which needs to be set up. I've used G7CNF-0 because I had an APRS call sign with that set up once before. So I decided to continue using that because outside of this application, I don't have any use or involvement with APRS any longer. The passcode, which here is blocked out because it's my personal PIN number. Important features, the latitude and longitude. This one threw me. When you actually set the receiver into the full communication with APRS mode, the full noise monitoring setup, obviously the signal levels from each of the bands is reported, but also your location is reported. But it's the way in which the latitude and longitude are input in these fields. If they're not done correctly, then they are not included in that final report. Now, I guess it comes down to personal preference as to how finicky you are. You've already gathered I'm pretty finicky when it comes to stuff like this, so I wanted to get it right. So what you have is a latitude, which is 51 for me, which is 51 degrees, 11 minutes, and then the decimal minutes I put in afterwards, and then of course whether you're north or south of the equator. Being this is a UK monitoring program only, it's obviously only going to be north. The longitude was the one that threw me. I kept getting this wrong because I didn't read the paperwork and enter the numbers explicitly as were instructed on the paperwork. APRS requires 180 degrees of longitude, so therefore there needs to be 3 significant digits for the number of degrees. So in this particular instance I'm 2 degrees west, and therefore because of the fact that there needs to be 3 digits entered prior to the minutes, then for me this is 002, representing 2 degrees west. 33 minutes west, decimal, 23 decimal minutes west. And once I'd got that corrected, the VI APRS came in just fine. I'll run up a web browser in a second so that you can see the data as it comes in. Always the last entry to come in will have the latitude and longitude missing, and that is instated when the following data set 10 minutes later is input. So there will always be one entry in your list without latitude and longitude. Don't panic, that rectifies itself. So once the data is entered in, it's simply a matter of starting the noise measurement. The mode is automatically changed, the frequency is automatically changed to the first of the 5 measurement frequencies here. The filter width is also changed because, of course, for the noise measurement to be valid data, everybody needs not only to be using a calibrated receiver, but they also need to be using the same frequency, but more importantly the same filter width, because of course in SDR the signal strength on any frequency is determined not only by the incoming signal but also by the audio passband of the receiver. I could demonstrate this by, if I stop the noise measurements a second, I'll just demonstrate this point to you. I'll start the receiver manually and I'll go to, let's go to 60 meters. Now as you can see, there does seem to be a rather high signal level here on the S meter for 60 meters. And this is at 2.7 kilohertz on upper sideband. But if I change the mode to AM, which has already been preset to 6 kilohertz bandwidth, that's the reason why the signal level is so high. My next door neighbour has kindly got himself a ComTrend power line adapter. But you see the signal level changes. If I drop the signal level back to 500 hertz, you will see that the level of the signal on the signal meter has now dropped. That is because the signal noise power is determined by the filter bandwidth. And there we have it. You simply leave the unit in noise measurement on. Obviously, if you don't want to be driven crazy, it's rather nice to have the AF gain turned off or turned down so that it's no longer audible. Make sure periodically that your XP hasn't done anything silly and decided to crash, especially if you're running a virtual machine like this. And so that's it. That was the setting up of the Sentinel using a virtual machine. But, and of course the but, is that this laptop that I'm using with the virtual machine is also used for software-defined radio. Now, by the time you take into consideration the processing cycles needed for my SDR application, having 2 SDR applications running on the same machine, one of which is being run inside a virtual machine on a different operating system, it proved too much even for my i5. So I had to find another solution in order to get my laptop back. And so that brings us to my final solution, which was sort of throwing caution to the wind a little bit and being a bit experimental. But I think it's actually a good solution. So now we'll move swiftly across to that. Because I knew that the Sentinel would work on a low power device, having used it with a Atom-based netbook, I figured that it would probably run on one of the low-end-ish netbooks that were available. So I had a look to see what was about, and I found one which had RS232 on the front, which seemed quite novel. This was a Shuttle XS36V. So I took the plunge and I bought one. I was pleasantly surprised to discover that although it had plastic panels, it was shielded very nicely too, and even the ribbon connectors on the interior were also shielded. The device is fanless, it makes no noise. It's extremely small, as you can see when comparing it to my rather towering tower. And all in all, it seemed quite a quaint solution. Now, it's a bare bones system, so it requires providing both memory and a hard disk. Fortunately, I had a spare SSD to hand and also some memory, so that was not a problem. So I put it all together and I loaded up XP onto it, and to my, I won't say considerable surprise, but certainly to my relief, I discovered that the Sentinel software ran very nicely indeed. In fact, it was running better than it did on the netbook. So this is my final solution, the Shuttle XS36V, silent, slim PC, which has now been pushed into a little corner somewhere out of sight in the shack, not taking up any space. It's great. I can check it using TeamViewer, because it's connected to the network, and perfect. I've nothing else that I can add to it. It works brilliantly. It is proven stable. It's been running now for several days. Nothing more I can add, so it comes highly recommended. Also, I did a quick check on it with the spectrum analyzer to look at the any dirt that might have been coming from the switch mode power supply, and again I was very pleasantly surprised. It appears to be nicely made piece of kit, highly recommended. So if you're looking for a bit of space in the shack and maybe something to run your Sentinel noise monitoring system, then well, I don't think you can get better than this, given the size, the performance to price ratio, etc. all seem very good indeed. So there you have it. That is the final solution. And finally, the final solution as is deployed. I don't know very much you can see it, but the Sentinel sideways arm slipped neatly beside the shuttle, taking up no extra room. Hey presto. I hope the video has been of use. Say 7 threes, and once again I implore you to think carefully about becoming a participant in this noise monitoring initiative, because every bit of data that we can get will be used and will be useful. So take care, thanks for watching, 7 threes, and we'll catch you further down the video log. Bye bye.